The new neighbor. In the sleepy town of Brookville, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. Everyone knew everyone, and the streets were usually filled with familiar faces. That is, until the old Grayson house, long abandoned and shrouded in mystery, suddenly had a new tenant. Emily Sanders, a high school teacher who lived next door, noticed the change immediately. One evening, the lights in the Grayson house flickered on, and standing on the porch was a tall man. He introduced himself as Mr. Damian Gray, but there was something unsettling about him. His dark, intense eyes seemed to peer right through her when they briefly met. The neighbors, like Emily's best friend Claire, couldn't stop talking about him. That house has been empty for years, and now this strange guy moves in out of nowhere? It's odd, Claire said, her voice filled with suspicion. Emily, though unnerved, dismissed it. After all, new people moved to town every now and just because Mr. Gray was a little peculiar didn't mean anything sinister. But over the next few days, more strange things began to happen. Emily noticed Mr. Gray only left his house late at night and always returned just before dawn. His house was eerily quiet during the day. Then, one night, as she was grading papers, she heard faint chanting coming from his backyard. Curious, she peeked through her bedroom window and saw something that chilled her to the bone. Mr. Gray stood in the middle of his yard, surrounded by a circle of candles, his head bowed as if in prayer, or perhaps something far darker. When Mr. Gray suddenly looked up, his eyes locking onto hers from across the yard, Emily froze. She quickly closed the curtains, heart racing. Claire's earlier words came rushing back, and Emily began to wonder if there was something more to her new neighbor than just a quiet, reclusive man. That night, lying in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The quiet town of Brookville no longer felt safe. Something dark had moved in next door, and Emily couldn't help but feel that it had its sights set on her. Whispers of darkness. The unsettling events surrounding Mr. Gray weighed heavily on Emily's mind, but things grew even stranger after that night in the backyard. The whispers and chanting she had heard replayed in her thoughts, making it impossible to ignore the growing sense of dread. Mr. Gray's odd behavior became more apparent. He never appeared in daylight, and his nightly comings and goings were always shrouded in silence. Emily would occasionally catch glimpses of him through her window, standing motionless in the yard, staring into the night as though he was waiting for something or someone. One evening, after returning home from work, Emily found an unexpected package on her doorstep. There was no note, no return address, only her name written in an unfamiliar, sharp script. Hesitantly, she brought the package inside and opened it. Inside was a worn, black leather-bound book. The pages were filled with cryptic symbols and illustrations, images of rituals and demons, with the word Lucifer appearing repeatedly throughout. She quickly shut the book, a cold chill running down her spine. Despite her efforts to rationalize it as some sort of cruel prank, Emily couldn't shake the eerie connection between the book and Mr. Gray. From that night on, she began having vivid, terrifying dreams. In each one, Mr. Gray stood at the foot of her bed, whispering in a language she couldn't understand. Every morning, she woke up feeling drained, as if the dreams were slowly pulling her energy away. Emily confided in her best friend, Claire, hoping for some reassurance. "You're probably just stressed," Claire said, trying to comfort her. "I mean, sure, he's a little creepy, but that doesn't mean he's dangerous." But Emily couldn't ignore what she was experiencing. The dreams, the book, the chanting, it was all connected. One morning, Emily discovered faint marks on her skin, burns in the shape of symbols she recognized from the book. Panic set in. She realized whatever was happening wasn't just in her head. There was something sinister going on, and it all led back to Mr. Gray. Terrified and unsure of what to do, Emily knew she couldn't simply ignore it any longer. Something evil was lurking next door, and it seemed to be creeping closer to her with each passing night. The unveiling. Emily's fear grew as the strange events escalated. Determined to find answers, she headed to the town library, hoping to uncover more about the disturbing symbols she had seen in the Black Book and the eerie connection to Mr. Gray. For hours, she sifted through old texts, searching for any mention of the rituals and markings that haunted her dreams. Finally, buried in a dusty history book, she stumbled upon something that sent a shiver down her spine: the Grayson family name. The Graysons, it turned out, were no ordinary residents. Centuries ago, they were rumored to be involved in occult practices, worshipping dark forces and performing forbidden rituals. The family mysteriously vanished, and their mansion had remained empty for decades. The townspeople, as Emily learned, had long whispered about a curse on the property, though most dismissed it as nothing more than a local ghost story. Yet, here was Mr. Gray, living in that same cursed house. Her discovery filled Emily with dread. She realized that Mr. Gray wasn't just a peculiar neighbor, he was connected to something far darker. Armed with this unsettling knowledge, she felt a growing sense of urgency. That night, she decided to confront him. As she approached the Grayson house, her heart pounded in her chest. The front door creaked open on its own, as if expecting her. Inside, the air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the shadows in the corners seemed to shift and twist unnaturally. Mr. Gray stood in the center of the dimly lit room, his back turned to her. "You've been watching me, haven't you?" he said, his voice cold but calm. Emily's pulse quickened. She demanded to know who or what he truly was. Slowly, Mr. Gray turned to face her. His eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and the smile on his face sent a wave of terror through her. "I'm not just your neighbor," he said, his voice low and filled with menace. "I am the devil next door." As he spoke, the air around him seemed to hum with dark energy. Emily felt trapped, paralyzed by fear. She realized with chilling certainty that she had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. She had uncovered the truth, but it was too late. A deal with darkness. Emily stood frozen in the darkened room, the weight of Mr. Gray's words crushing her. "I am the devil next door." The reality of her situation hit her like a storm. This was no ordinary man. The evil she had sensed was far deeper, and now she stood face to face with it. As Mr. Gray stepped closer, his eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and the symbols on Emily's skin began to burn. She tried to move, to scream, but her body wouldn't obey. The shadows seemed to come alive, creeping toward her, binding her in place. "You've seen too much, Emily," Mr. Gray whispered, his voice echoing through the room. "But I can offer you a way out." His smile was cruel as he made his offer. "Join me. You felt the power growing inside you. Embrace it, and I'll spare your life." The darkness pulsed around her, tempting her with a strange, twisted allure. For a moment, Emily felt a pull toward it, as if her very soul was being tugged into the abyss. But deep down, she knew this wasn't her path. She wasn't like him. A soft voice echoed in her mind, her mother's voice. "You're stronger than this." In that moment, Emily felt a surge of strength. The symbols on her skin, once burning, now glowed with a different energy. The words she had researched came back to her, ancient phrases meant to banish dark forces. She whispered them, barely audible at first, but with each word, her voice grew stronger. Mr. Gray's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, and he lunged toward her, but Emily's voice rang out with the final word of the incantation. Light exploded from her hands, bright and pure, pushing back the darkness. Mr. Gray screamed, a terrible sound that seemed to shake the very walls of the house. The shadows twisted and writhed around him, and with one last desperate howl, he was pulled into the swirling darkness and vanished. The room fell silent. Emily stood alone, her heart pounding. The oppressive weight that had filled the house was gone. The darkness banished, for now. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she glanced back at the Grayson house. It was quiet once more, its secrets buried deep. But Emily knew the truth. Evil had lived next door. And though she had won this battle, she would always be watching, ready for whatever darkness might come next.